Knock Knock. Back in 2018, Knock Knock by Kaneki Jones emerged as a socially charged horror short that uses the genre to tell a story both terrifying and tragically real. Unlike most supernatural entries on this list, the horror here is rooted in everyday struggles and systematic failures, which makes its ending hit even harder. The story is rooted in everyday struggles and systemic failures, which makes its ending hit even harder. The story centers on Cinia, a single mother trying to hold things together while also being a nurturing figure in her community. We see her braiding children's hair for a little extra income, and even cooking meals for the kids next door, who are clearly neglected by their own guardians. From the beginning, Cinia is established not as a victim, but as someone who quietly shoulders responsibility for those around her. This makes her all the more sympathetic when the horror creeps in. The turning point begins one evening when Cinia hears chaos from the neighbor's home. Raised voices, the sound of struggle. It's the kind of noise most people try to ignore, but Cinia isn't wired that way. She decides to step in, walking into a situation that spirals out of her control. What she finds is far worse than she imagined, a shocking revelation that reframes the entire story and makes clear that the true horror here isn't a ghost or a monster, but the very real dangers that fester behind closed doors in struggling households. Jones handles the reveal with unflinching honesty. The camera doesn't rely on jump scares or supernatural tricks. Instead, it lingers on human pain and vulnerability, reminding viewers that the most devastating terrors are often the ones rooted in poverty, abuse, and neglect. The realism of the acting only deepens the impact, with performances that feel lived in and painfully convincing. What makes scary is that it weaponizes empathy. The horror lands not because of what we don't understand, but because of what we do. The raw recognition of problems we see too often in real life, wrapped in the familiar language of horror storytelling. By the time the short ends, the viewer is left with a sobering sense of injustice that lingers far beyond the credits. This is why Knock Knock stands tall among iconic horror shorts. It proves the genre doesn't need the supernatural to unsettle us. Sometimes, the scariest thing of all is how close to home the horror really is. Guest. In 2020, the filmmaker Finn Callan delivered Guest, a psychological horror short that blurs the line between mental illness and the supernatural. It opens with a striking image, a young woman in a hospital bed, her head wrapped in heavy bandages covering both her eyes and ears. The nurses who discovered her describe a bizarre scene. She was found in another woman's bathroom, screaming, unable to explain what had happened. From there, the film takes us back into her memories to reveal how she ended up in such a state. The flashback begins in an almost mundane setting, a quiet suburban street at night. The protagonist, already uneasy, is being followed by something that feels impossible to escape. That something is revealed as a terrifying humanoid figure with pale skin and enormous unblinking eyes, a design that feels grotesque yet strangely pitiful. The creature doesn't lunge or roar. Instead, it lingers just out of reach, moving with an unnatural persistence that makes its presence even more disturbing. The chase builds gradually, with silence doing as much work as sound. Unlike many horror shorts that lean on sharp audio stings or sudden edits, Guest thrives on quiet dread, making each step the protagonist takes feel like a countdown to collapse. Her fear isn't expressed only through her screams, it's in her frantic attempts to hide, in the way she covers her ears, and in her desperate need to shut out a world that has become unbearable. The title itself, Guest, suggests layers of meaning. Is the figure an intruder in her life, something alien that has forced its way in, or is it a manifestation of her own trauma? An unwanted presence in her mind that she can't silence, no matter how far she runs. Callan never gives a concrete answer, leaving the audience to grapple with the ambiguity. That uncertainty is what makes the film linger long after it ends. There's also a darkly ironic edge to the short. The design of the monster adds a strange, unnerving absurdity to the terror. It's not funny in the conventional sense, but its grotesque exaggeration makes the horror feel surreal, as though the protagonist's mind is distorting reality under the weight of her fear. By the end, when the narrative loops back to the hospital bed, the story doesn't feel resolved. Instead, it feels like a cycle, a suggestion that no matter how far she runs, the guest will always return. In that way, the short functions both as a nightmare scenario and as a chilling metaphor for how some internal struggles never leave, no matter how much someone tries to shut them out. Ignore It. Directed by Sam Evanson, Ignore It is a 7-minute short released on October 29, 2021, that uses its brief runtime to deliver an incredibly tense family drama wrapped in supernatural horror. The film opens with a family gathered around the dinner table, but it quickly becomes clear that something else is present in the room, a figure known only as the Woman. The rules for survival are simple but chilling. The family must not acknowledge her. If they pretend she isn't there, she'll eventually leave. This premise, while straightforward, becomes increasingly unbearable to watch as the camera lingers on the entity looming in the background, moving closer and breaking the family's composure with each passing moment. The brilliance of Ignore It lies in how it weaponizes silence and restraint. The entity never lunges or screams, but instead exerts its power by testing the family's willpower. For some, ignoring the presence becomes too much, and that failure carries devastating consequences. The short explores how human instinct clashes with survival logic. The harder you try to suppress fear and curiosity, the more it overwhelms you. The visuals are stark, with dim lighting and a claustrophobic setting that traps both the characters and the audience in the same suffocating space. Combined with naturalistic acting, the dinner table becomes an arena where dread mounts second by second. Viewers are left with the unsettling realization that the horror is not only in the entity itself, but in how fragile human endurance really is. Beyond its immediate tension, Ignore It has been interpreted as a metaphor for trauma, abuse, or unresolved problems that families attempt to bury rather than confront. The lesson it delivers is sharp. Some horrors cannot be solved through confrontation. Survival sometimes means looking away, even when every instinct tells you otherwise. Portrait of God. Released in 2022 and directed by Dylan Clark, Portrait of God is a short that leans heavily into theological horror, combining minimalist visuals with unsettling questions about faith and perception. It runs just 7 minutes, but in that time it builds a mood that lingers long after the final frame. The film opens with a biblical quote from Exodus 33:20, "No man shall see me and live." From there, we follow a character named Mia Riley who is practicing a presentation on a mysterious painting known as the Portrait of God. On the surface, the canvas is nothing more than an expanse of black paint, but certain viewers claim they can see something within it, a gaunt figure with glinting eyes peering back. As Mia studies the painting, her composure begins to crack. The audience never sees a full depiction of the figure, but the suggestion of it is more frightening than a clear reveal. The short relies on dark space and negative imagery, forcing the viewer's imagination to fill in the gaps. Each shot is composed with suffocating stillness, and the absence of sound amplifies the creeping sense of dread. The horror here is twofold. On one hand, it's about the fear of seeing something divine that the human mind is not meant to comprehend, and on the other, it's about the danger of obsession. The painting acts as a trap, pulling Mia in until the boundary between art and reality seems to collapse. Portrait of God has resonated with online audiences not only for its scares, but also for the questions it raises. Was the figure truly divine, or something far darker that cloaked itself in religious imagery? Could it be a commentary on how humans impose meaning onto the unknown? Dylan Clark never provides an answer, leaving the audience with an unsettling ambiguity that mirrors the nature of belief itself. This short has been widely shared on YouTube and horror forums, praised for doing so much with so little. With only a single location, one actor, and a cleverly executed concept, Portrait of God has cemented itself as one of the most thought-provoking modern horror shorts. Laura Hasn't Slept. Released in 2020 and directed by Parker Finn, Laura Hasn't Slept is an 11-minute short that reimagines a common fear, nightmares that cross into reality, and spins it into something deeply unsettling. The short opens in a therapist's office where a young woman named Laura describes her recurring dream. At first, it sounds like a typical anxiety session, but as she goes on, the details become more chilling. Laura explains that in her dream, she's visited by a man with a disturbingly wide grin, a face that never changes no matter how often the dream recurs. Her fear is not simply that the man is stalking her in sleep, it's that one day he will finally cross over and kill her. This setup places both Laura and the audience in a liminal space, unsure whether the threat is psychological or supernatural. The therapist encourages her to unpack the fear, but the tension escalates when reality begins to shift around them. The room flickers, the conversation twists, and the smiling man himself begins to appear. These intrusions fracture the stability of the scene, making it impossible to tell whether Laura is still in the office or trapped in another nightmare. The short thrives on its pacing. Moments of calm are punctuated by sudden distortions, keeping the audience constantly off balance. And when the smiling man finally emerges, his presence is brief but devastating. His design is simple, human enough to be familiar, but distorted enough to feel unnatural. The smile is both mocking and predatory, a visual that burrows into the viewer's memory. Thematically, Laura Hasn't Slept is about the terror of inevitability. Laura's exhaustion, her inability to rest, becomes a metaphor for how some traumas or fears cannot be escaped. Sleep, the one place meant to provide safety, becomes a trap she cannot avoid. The impact of the short was significant. Its success caught the attention of Paramount, who brought Parker Finn on to expand the concept into the feature film Smile 2022. While the feature broadened the lore and introduced new characters, many fans still point to Laura Hasn't Slept as the purer, more focused distillation of the nightmare logic that made the idea so effective in the first place. Today, the short remains a touchstone for how minimal resources can be enough to create a lasting horror experience. Lights Out. Released in 2013 and directed by David F. Sandberg, Lights Out is one of the shortest films on this list at just 3 minutes, but it manages to pack in a story that feels complete and terrifying. It plays on primal fear, the dark, and what might be waiting in it. The story begins in the quiet routine of a woman preparing for bed. She turns off the lights in the hallway, and immediately a dark silhouette is revealed at the far end. Shocked, she quickly flips the switch back on, and the figure vanishes. She tests it again. Off, the figure appears. On, it disappears. Each time she repeats the action, the figure seems a little closer, lingering just long enough to confirm it wasn't a trick of her eyes. This sequence establishes the rules in a way that's simple and terrifying. The creature only exists in the dark. It cannot be seen when the lights are on, but it doesn't go away. It waits, creeping forward with every flicker of darkness. The tension grows as the woman tries to reassure herself, turning the lights on and off while her fear escalates. Eventually, she decides to leave the light on and climb into bed, thinking she's safe. But that's when the short delivers its cruel twist. As she lies down, the lamp flickers and dies. The darkness fills the room, and the figure, now inches from her, lunges. The screen cuts to black. The genius of Lights Out lies in its efficiency. It doesn't waste time explaining who or what the figure is. Instead, it locks the viewer into the same helpless position as the protagonist, knowing the danger but unable to stop the lights from going out. The sound design heightens the fear, with the faint creaks of movement in the dark underscoring the inevitability of the attack. The short was such a viral success online that it caught the attention of Hollywood producers, leading to the feature-length adaptation in 2016. While the movie expanded the lore, introducing a backstory and multiple characters, many horror fans still praise the original short for its purity. It's the raw, stripped-down nightmare version of the concept, a fear distilled into 3 minutes of escalating dread. More than a decade later, Lights Out remains a perfect example of how a horror short doesn't need elaborate effects or exposition to terrify. It just needs to trap the audience in a scenario that feels inescapable. Mama. Released in 2009, Andy Muschietti's short Mama is only 4 minutes long, but it manages to condense a terrifying scenario into something unforgettable. It begins with 2 young sisters, startled awake in their home. At first, the situation feels ordinary, children roused in the middle of the night, but their fear makes it clear that something is wrong. They creep through the house with wide, anxious eyes, whispering about Mama having come back. As they move cautiously, the sound design becomes crucial. We hear floorboards groan, a faint growl in the distance, and the girls' hurried footsteps. When Mama finally appears, it's not a warm maternal figure, but a distorted supernatural entity. Her body is twisted, her movements jerky and inhuman, sliding through the house in a way that feels more like a predator than a parent. The sisters scramble toward the door, desperate to get away, but the entity closes in with alarming speed. The entire short is structured like a chase sequence. The camera follows the girls closely, capturing their terror in long, uninterrupted takes that amplify the urgency. Unlike many horror shorts that rely on a jump scare and cutaway, Mama sustains the dread until the final moment when the entity finally catches up. The last image lingers, leaving no question that the children are at the mercy of something truly monstrous. The effectiveness of Mama comes from its simplicity. It doesn't waste time explaining who or what the entity is. It simply forces the audience to experience the girl's fear firsthand. The distorted design of Mama and the unnatural way she moves sear themselves into memory, proving that strong visuals and raw atmosphere can be more powerful than elaborate exposition. The short was such a success that it caught the attention of Guillermo del Toro, who championed Muschietti to expand it into a feature-length film in 2013. While the movie fleshes out the lore by adding backstory about a ghostly mother figure bound to the children, the short remains a pure nightmare distilled to its essence. It's a sprint through terror, one that demonstrates just how much horror can be squeezed into only a few minutes when executed with vision and precision. Curve. Released in 2016, Tim Egan's short Curve is one of the most nerve-wracking survival scenarios ever put to film, despite having almost no dialogue or backstory. The short opens abruptly. A young woman regains consciousness lying on a strange sloped concrete surface. At first, it's disorienting. She doesn't know where she is or how she got there, but as she shifts even slightly, the horrifying truth sets in. The surface she's on isn't flat. It's curved downward into a black abyss. If she slips, she will fall, and the drop looks endless. Her shoes have no grip, and her palms are already slick with blood from trying to steady herself. Every attempt to move causes her to slide a little further toward the void. The camera lingers on the details, the smears of blood on the stone, the tremble in her hands, the helpless look in her eyes, making the audience feel every second of her panic. There are no monsters, no jump scares, just the crushing terror of gravity and the certainty that one wrong movement means death. As the minutes drag on, she claws at the surface, desperately searching for friction. Her breathing grows ragged, her muscles start to give out, and she realizes she can't hold on forever. The sound design is minimal, but devastatingly effective. The scrape of skin against stone, the echo of her shoes slipping, the hollow roar of the abyss below. At one point, she tries to push upward, but her strength fails and she slides dangerously close to the edge. Each near slip feels like the end. The brilliance of Curve lies in its simplicity. It takes a single universal fear and stretches it out over 10 agonizing minutes. There's no explanation for where she is or why she's there, and none is needed. The short works as a pure nightmare distilled in its raw form. You're not just watching her fight to survive, you're experiencing the panic alongside her. By the time the screen cuts to black, there's no release, no relief, no resolution. Whether she survives or not is left unanswered, forcing the audience to carry the dread long after the short ends. Curve proves that horror doesn't always need elaborate mythology or supernatural creatures. Sometimes it's enough to trap someone in an impossible situation and let the human instinct for survival and fear of failure do the rest. Other Side of the Box. Released in 2018 and directed by Caleb J. Phillips, Other Side of the Box is one of those rare short films that starts innocently enough but escalates into nightmare fuel almost immediately. It opens with a couple, Ben and Rachel, enjoying a quiet night together when Ben's old friend, Sean, unexpectedly shows up at their doorstep. He's disheveled, anxious, and carrying a wrapped Christmas present. His excuse for visiting is vague, his behavior unsettled, and before leaving, he insists that they open the gift immediately. Inside the festive wrapping is a simple plain wooden box. At first glance, it seems empty, but the longer the couple stares into it, the more wrong it feels. Then comes the note. Whatever they do, they must not look away. As long as someone's eyes remain fixed on the box, the thing inside, or perhaps behind, cannot move. If they blink, turn away, or leave it unattended, the consequences will be fatal. From this point forward, the film traps both its characters and its audience in a game of unbearable tension. Rachel and Ben take turns watching the box, trying to make sense of Sean's bizarre warning. When Rachel looks away for just a moment, the contents shift. Something inside has moved. Soon after, she peers closer and is met with the haunting sight of a pale humanoid figure with lifeless eyes peering back at her. The box has become a prison for something that's alive, aware, and hungry for freedom. The short masterfully stretches its runtime with the smallest details, the sound of breathing, the weight of silence, the characters' growing dread as their sanity begins to crumble. Who is this figure in the box? How long can they possibly keep watch? What happens if they fall asleep, or if they simply can't look any longer? The film never fully answers these questions, which only amplifies the unease. Unlike many horror shorts that rely on jump scares, Other Side of the Box builds its horror on inevitability. The rules are clear, but impossible to sustain. Everyone blinks. Everyone looks away eventually. The box doesn't just contain a monster, it contains the certainty of doom. By the end, the couple's cozy evening has been shattered beyond repair, and viewers are left with an inescapable thought. If the box ended up in your living room, how long could you really last? Behind Closed Doors. Jonathan Button's Behind Closed Doors from 2009 is one of those short films that manages to unsettle its audience with very little time to work with. At its core, it's about childhood fear, the monsters we think live in our bedrooms, and the darker truth that sometimes the real monsters live within the family home. The short begins with a young boy who insists that something sinister is hiding in his room. His pleas for help fall on deaf ears, as his father dismisses his fears with anger and frustration rather than comfort. This setup immediately establishes a sense of vulnerability. The child's innocence pitted against an unseen terror, while the very person meant to protect him becomes a source of hostility. As the night unfolds, the atmosphere thickens. The boy hides under the covers, the camera lingering on shadows and the creaks of the house, building dread out of the ordinary. Viewers are drawn into the boy's perspective, unsure if the danger is supernatural or if the father himself is the real threat. Every sound, every dark corner feels alive with possibility. The tension escalates when the father grows increasingly aggressive, amplifying the unease. Just when it seems the story is heading in one direction, Behind Closed Doors delivers its twist. The boy's fears weren't unfounded, but the true revelation is much more disturbing than a simple monster in the closet trope. The film cleverly blurs the lines between domestic abuse, childhood trauma, and supernatural horror, leaving viewers questioning who, or what, the real monster was all along. What makes Behind Closed Doors especially memorable is its ability to unsettle without showing much at all. The terror thrives on suggestion, forcing viewers to imagine the worst rather than spelling it out. This impact was strong enough to inspire a full remake, where Button expanded and revamped the visuals, deepening the creep factor while preserving the original's core message. Sometimes the scariest things we face aren't creatures in the dark, but the people we trust most. Suck-a-Blood. In 2012, Jake Cudahy and Ben Tillett gave us Suck-a-Blood, a gothic fairy tale horror short that feels like it could have been ripped straight out of the Brothers Grimm archives. This is a story about curses, consequences, and the terrifying way morality tales used to be told before they were softened for modern children. The story opens with a chilling, rhyming narrator who leads us into a dark bedtime story. A young girl is scolded for her habit of sucking her thumb, an act her cruel stepmother deems disgusting and shameful. To punish her, the woman tells the girl that if she ever does it again, a monstrous figure called Suck-a-Blood will come for her in the night. The warning is meant as discipline, but in true folklore fashion, it becomes prophecy. The film unfolds like a living nightmare, with striking visuals drenched in gothic style, jagged silhouettes, candlelit shadows, and a color palette that feels like ink dripping off the page. As the girl struggles with her fear and compulsion, the story builds toward its grim turning point. Alone in her bed, she gives in to her habit once more, and as promised, Suck-a-Blood appears, a tall, nightmarish creature with claws and fangs, creeping into the room to make good on the curse. The moment of confrontation is swift but devastating. The monster does not hesitate, dragging the girl into a fate that seals the tale with brutal finality. Like many old cautionary fables, the punishment far outweighs the crime, hammering home the cruelty of both the stepmother's warning and the universe of the story itself. Suck-a-Blood works not only because of its design and atmosphere, but also because it revives the unsettling spirit of classic fairy tales, stories not told to comfort children, but to scare them into obedience. Its 7-minute runtime feels timeless, as though this is a story whispered around fires centuries ago, now brought to life with modern cinematic artistry. And that wraps up every iconic horror short explained. What's striking about this lineup is how each film proves you don't need a massive budget or a feature-length runtime to deliver a chilling experience. If you're looking for a starting point, Lights Out is the perfect entry. 3 minutes of pure distilled fear that taps into a universal childhood terror. But if you want something layered and thought-provoking, Guest and Ignore It dive into psychological and metaphorical horror that lingers long after the movie ends. Well, if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video, share your favorite horror short in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We'll be covering even more hidden gems and cult classics that continue to shape the horror landscape. Doppelganger. Directed by Drew Daywalt and released in 2010, Doppelganger is one of the most effective examples of a short horror film that uses minimal exposition to explore a deeply existential fear. At just 6 minutes, the short wastes no time plunging into uncertainty, building dread not through violence or spectacle, but through disorientation and betrayal. The short begins with a woman driving at night. Everything feels normal until her phone rings. On the line is her husband, panicked, urgent, telling her not to go home. He says something is wrong. That warning hits immediately because it creates a paradox. If her husband is calling her, who's in the house? When she arrives, the front door is open, lights are on. Her husband greets her like nothing's out of place. Same voice, same face, same calm routine. That's when the short begins its real work. The horror doesn't come from sudden violence, but the steady unraveling of trust. Her instincts are screaming, but every visible sign tells her she's safe. That disconnect becomes the engine of dread. The man inside the house talks like her husband. He remembers shared details, uses their same tone of voice. But there's something wrong in the pauses. The way he watches her too closely. The way the house feels staged. The film holds tension by refusing to confirm or deny her fear. Nothing overtly supernatural happens, but reality doesn't feel stable either. She hesitates. He approaches. The final moments play out with no clear resolution, no answers. The scene cuts before any truth is revealed. Doppelganger explains identity horror without exposition. It uses the question, what if the person you love had been replaced? And traps both the character and the viewer in that uncertainty. The story doesn't give you a monster, it gives you a choice. Trust what you see or trust what you feel. And either way, you're probably wrong. Alma. Directed by Rodrigo Blas and released in 2009, Alma is a 6-minute animated short that lures the viewer in with softness, only to trap them in silence. It opens on a snow-blanketed street in a quiet European town. A young girl, alone, walks through the cold. The setting feels harmless. Then she notices a toy shop. In the window is a single doll. It looks exactly like her. Same clothes, same face, same expression. She stares at it. The door creaks open. She goes inside. From this point on, the short begins to shift. The toy shop is silent, dim, and packed with dolls frozen in unnatural poses. None of them move, but they all seem like they just did. Alma explores the shop slowly. The space absorbs her focus. The outside world fades. Her attention stays locked on the doll, her doll, still sitting high on a shelf. There's no music, no voiceover, no instructions. The horror builds through atmosphere. Each shot narrows, the pacing slows. Alma climbs the furniture, reaching for the doll. Her hand meets its skin, and she vanishes. Now her soul is inside the doll. Her eyes move behind glass. She can see the shop, but she can't leave. The camera pans back, and in the front window, another doll has appeared. A new child. The cycle repeats. Alma explains horror through pattern, not plot. There's no monster chasing her. The shop doesn't lure her in, it lets her walk in. The danger hides in stillness, not action. That's what gives the film its weight. Curiosity becomes a cage, and the trap never has to move. It only needs to wait. Behind the Door. Directed by Bailey Hart and released in 2013, Behind the Door runs just 3 minutes and cuts straight into tension. There's no setup, no dialogue, only a boy, home alone, staring at a door that won't stop knocking. The voice on the other side calls his name. It's soft at first, familiar. It speaks like someone he trusts. That's the trap. The longer the boy listens, the more the tone changes. Words stretch, cadence breaks. What once sounded like comfort begins to slur into something mechanical, empty, and wrong. The camera stays locked to the boy's face. His chest rises and falls faster. His body stiffens. Every reaction is raw, shot close enough that you feel his panic building with no room to breathe. There's no music, just the creak of the floor, the knock, and the voice, repeating, asking, pushing. He doesn't open the door all the way. He barely moves it, but that's enough. The film doesn't show a creature. It doesn't need to. The look in his eyes when he sees what's waiting says everything. It isn't someone lost. It isn't someone coming home. It's something that knows how to sound like people. Behind the Door works because of its efficiency. In a matter of minutes, it distills one of childhood's deepest fears, the sense that danger can call your name and mimic trust right outside your door. White with Red. Released in 2013 and directed by Brandon Christensen, White with Red adapts one of the internet's most famous creepypasta stories into a visual nightmare. In only 5 minutes, it transforms a simple urban legend into a cinematic shock that feels both familiar and freshly disturbing. The story follows a man who receives a late-night phone call. On the other end, a stranger calmly asks whether he prefers the walls in his house to be painted white or red. It sounds absurd at first, almost like a prank, but the voice lingers, pressing the question with a cold persistence. From that moment forward, the film turns a harmless conversation into a death sentence. The visuals are sharp and restrained. The camera rarely strays from the man's face, capturing his confusion as it slowly becomes terror. The lighting stays minimal, throwing him into heavy shadows that make the silence between each line feel unbearable. There are no jump scares or elaborate effects. The tension comes entirely from the words and the growing realization that whoever's calling isn't outside his house, but already inside. The final moments strike quickly. A sound, a movement in the dark, and the question, white or red, shifts from hypothetical to literal. The screen cuts away before the violence fully erupts, leaving the audience to imagine the aftermath. White with Red succeeds because it doesn't dilute the creepypasta source with explanations or lore. It shows the story exactly as people told it online. Fast, brutal, and ending on the kind of cliffhanger that leaves you staring into the dark corners of your own room. The Black Hole. Directed by Philip Sansom and Ollie Williams in 2008, The Black Hole is a 3-minute short that turns a mundane office into the site of a quiet downfall. It begins with a man working overtime, worn out and mechanical, pushing paper through a humming copier. One sheet comes out wrong, a solid black circle in the center. At first it looks like a misprint, until he casually places it on the table and his hand sinks through the surface. The discovery unfolds with no explanation. It's not magic or science fiction. It's simply a hole, real and physical, able to pass through anything it's pressed against. He tests it, cautiously at first. Then he uses it to steal a candy bar from a vending machine. No alarm, no consequence. The hole isn't threatening. It offers convenience, shortcut, access. The tone begins to shift when his eyes move to the office safe. He presses the sheet against it and reaches inside for cash. That's when the film stops feeling clever and starts feeling dangerous. He could walk away now, but he doesn't. Instead, the man climbs in. There's no music, no sudden scare, just a quiet moment of greed crossing a boundary. The sheet slips and the hole vanishes. You see, the hole doesn't use violence or creatures, it uses a concept. When something impossible gives you power, it will always offer one more chance to take more, and all it takes is one step too far to disappear completely. Alexia. Directed by Andres Borgi in 2013, Alexia begins with a man alone in a dim room, staring at the frozen memorial profile of his dead ex-girlfriend. Her name is Alexia, and she took her own life shortly after their breakup. Although he's with someone new, he keeps returning to that page, scrolling through her photos and reading old posts like he's still waiting for something to change. His girlfriend, clearly fed up with the emotional weight still hanging over them, asks him to unfriend her. He finally clicks, and that's when things start breaking. The profile glitches, her status updates change, and new messages begin arriving. Not from mourners, but from Alexia herself. They're personal, direct, and written in a tone only she would use. He tries to close the tabs, but the chat reopens. The screen pulses like it's responding to him, and the typing bubble doesn't stop. Every attempt to shut it down only makes her voice louder through the interface. His phone dies, the lights flicker, and the apartment begins to fold in on him. The webcam clicks on by itself. Shadows start moving in reflections, and even though he's completely alone, he's being watched. There are no jump scares or loud stings because Borgi builds tension by turning grief into a trap, and the deeper the man tries to disconnect, the more the digital world pulls him in, until Alexia is no longer on the screen. She's in the room. Bedfellows. Directed by Drew Daywalt and released in 2008, Bedfellows lasts just 2 minutes but delivers a full horror setup, escalation, and payoff using nothing more than a phone call and a bed. The film begins with a woman asleep beside her partner. The room is dark, lit only by soft ambient light. Then the phone rings. She answers, groggy, her voice quiet, but the person on the other end isn't just anyone. It's her real husband, calling to say he's on his way home. That's the moment the short turns. Without moving the camera or changing the lighting, the story forces the viewer to realize that the person lying beside her is not who she thought it was. There's no immediate scream. Instead, she slowly turns her head and the horror becomes visual. The figure beside her shifts, still under the covers, and suddenly the film's entire setup flips from peaceful to unsafe. The strength of Bedfellows lies in how it compresses time. It uses the audience trust, assuming the man beside her is her partner, and breaks it with one sentence. Once that trust is gone, the room feels unfamiliar. The bed becomes a trap. The intimacy of sleep is used against her. There's no monster reveal. The camera doesn't show what's under the covers. Instead, Daywalt holds the shot just long enough for the dread to register. The figure turns. The screen cuts to black. The fear comes not from gore, but from the realization that someone or something was already in bed before she even answered the phone. Bedfellows explains how a single moment of misplacement can unravel reality. It doesn't waste time with explanation or backstory. It shows how quickly a familiar space can become the last place you want to be. Peter the Penguin. Directed by Andrew Rudder and released in 2020, Peter the Penguin opens like an awkward family comedy but quickly shifts into something much darker. A man is meeting his partner's family for the first time during her nephew's birthday, and everything seems cheerful at first. Decorations are up, people are smiling, and a gift is about to be revealed. The boy has been waiting weeks for his toy penguin, but when the present arrives, it's not wrapped. It's shoved into a black garbage bag. The man who brought it, the boy's uncle, is stiff and intense, and when the penguin fails to work, the entire mood collapses. The family suddenly turns to the guest, demanding that he fix it. He tries to play along, but the pressure builds fast. The mother snaps, the father demands, and the uncle watches without blinking. What starts as polite encouragement quickly becomes something closer to a group interrogation. They don't want help, they want control. The toy must perform, and he must be the one to make it happen. The room shrinks around him as their voices rise, and no one cares about the child anymore. The penguin becomes a prop for emotional coercion, and he becomes the scapegoat when it doesn't respond. The tension explodes, not because of violence, but because the situation was always wired to break. Peter the Penguin turns something simple into a psychological trap. It shows how a toy, when loaded with expectation, can become a weapon, and how fast people will turn when appearances start to slip. Salt. Directed by Rob Savage and released in 2017, Salt is a 2-minute horror short that functions like a live grenade, compact and built entirely around one rule: don't break the circle. The story opens mid-crisis. A mother is in a darkened house, clearly terrified, clutching a canister of salt. We don't see the threat right away, but its effects are immediate. Her husband lies in bed, frozen or already dead. Her child is unconscious. Whatever she's facing, it's already inside. She draws a circle of salt around her daughter. That's the barrier, and the implication is clear. The creature stalking them can't cross it. But then she hears movement in the hallway. Her hand tightens around the container. She starts running. What follows is a blur of fast, tight shots. She dashes to grab medicine, protect her daughter, and avoid being cornered, all while never letting the salt run out. Each time she draws a new circle, the camera lingers just long enough to show how thin that boundary really is. The creature never appears in full, but its presence is felt in the air. The short ends with her misstep. The salt slips. The circle breaks, and the creature takes its chance. There's no scream, just a burst of violence off screen, and then silence. Salt explains its entire world through action, and this genre of horror works because the pacing never gives the character or the viewer time to recover. Every second is a sprint towards safety, until the last one isn't. The Cat with Hands. Directed by Robert Morgan in 2001, The Cat with Hands is a 4-minute folk horror short that imagines a creature clawing its way into humanity, one stolen body part at a time. It opens with a young man and an older companion beside a stone well. The older man retells a legend, a cat that didn't want to be a cat. It wanted to become human by collecting what it lacked. The story cuts to eerie stop-motion flashbacks. The cat doesn't hunt for food, it hunts for identity. First it tears off a boy's hands, then a tongue, then a face. Each theft moves it closer to something it shouldn't be. The animation exaggerates movement to create unease. The cat crawls using human hands, its body jerky and unnatural. Its eyes don't blink like an animal's. They stare like a person pretending to be calm. The horror comes not from sudden scares, but from watching something unnatural behave almost human. As the story ends, it circles back to the present. The older man's tale was bait. He changes, the boy is taken, and the cat, now wearing its newest face, sinks back into the well. The Cat with Hands explains its terror through transformation. It's not about revenge or possession. It's about a thing that collects humanity like parts from a market, and always comes back for more. And that wraps up part 2 of every iconic horror short explained. If you want to see how much dread can fit in 2 minutes, start with Bedfellows or Salt. Both use a single idea and deliver it with precision. But if you're looking for something a bit stranger, The Cat with Hands is one of the most quietly disturbing horror shorts ever made. If you liked this breakdown, make sure to like the video, drop your favorite horror short in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. We've got more terrifying deep cuts and overlooked nightmares lined up, and trust me, some of them you won't see coming. The Smiling Man. A.J. Briones' short film The Smiling Man, first shown online in 2015, starts like a dream that's already turning sour. A little girl wakes up in the middle of the night and follows a trail of red balloons drifting down the hallway. She doesn't scream or hesitate, she simply just moves forward, drawn by something she can't really explain. Down in the kitchen, the trail ends. Something is waiting for her. It's human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too pale, its grin stretched wide like someone trying to copy a smile and getting it completely wrong. The film has no dialogue, no music, just small sounds that make the silence feel heavier. Every twitch and bend of the creature was done by a real contortionist in full practical makeup, and it shows. Briones, who had worked at Pixar before this, made the film on a micro-budget using his own home as the set. Despite that, The Smiling Man became a viral hit, racking up millions of views on YouTube. And when people talk about The Smiling Man, they always mention one thing, how the camera cuts away too soon. You never see what happens next. Some think that's what makes it scarier, because it feels like the thing in the kitchen is just standing there, grinning, waiting for someone else to wake up. Don't Move. Released in 2017 under the Bloody Cuts banner, Don't Move drops you straight into panic from its very first frame. A group of friends sit frozen around a bloodstained Ouija board. One of them is already dead, and something invisible is stalking the room. The rule is simple, move and you die. The film never explains where the creature came from, only that it strikes with impossible speed the moment anyone twitches. The camera work keeps everything tight and suffocating. You can almost feel the air trembling with each breath the survivors try not to take. The thing moves in blurs and silhouettes, never fully seen, but always close enough to hear. Directed by Anthony Melton, the short was shot almost entirely in one night using practical effects and minimal lighting. That stripped-down style makes every sound feel louder than a scream. Interestingly, the filmmakers later admitted the movie was inspired by a real sleep paralysis experience, where the victim couldn't move as a shadowy figure approached. Knowing that detail makes Don't Move even worse to rewatch, because once you've seen it, staying still suddenly feels impossible. Play Me. Back in 2015, Play Me quietly dropped online and immediately unsettled everyone who watched it. It starts with a man finding an old VHS tape outside his apartment. No message, just 2 words scrawled in black marker saying, "Play me." Out of curiosity, he pops it into his player, expecting some prank or forgotten recording. Instead, the screen shows him, sitting in that same room, watching the same tape. At first, he laughs it off, but then the man on the screen moves a split second earlier than he does. Every twitch, every glance, already happening on the tape before he makes them in real life. The lighting starts to shift, the background behind him doesn't quite match anymore, and he realizes whatever is on that VHS is controlling him. Created by Anthony Melton and Ben Franklin under the Bloody Cuts anthology, the short used nothing but lighting tricks, timing, and a single room to create the illusion of time folding in on itself. No CGI, just smart minimal horror done right. One odd thing, the VHS prop wasn't made for the movie. The crew actually found it at a thrift store already labeled "Play Me." They kept it for the shoot, but after filming wrapped, it vanished from set and was never seen again. To this day, nobody knows where that tape ended up. The Jigsaw. Created by twin filmmakers Basil and Rashad Al-Safar, The Jigsaw arrived in 2017 and quickly stood out among short horror films for turning a simple thrift store find into a story of quiet dread. It follows 2 friends who discover an antique wooden puzzle at a yard sale and take it home, curious to see what picture it forms. The more they work on it, the stranger it becomes. Pieces seem to shift on their own, edges connect in ways that shouldn't be possible, and the final image slowly begins to resemble a face. As the last piece slides into place, the puzzle seems to breathe. The air in the room grows heavy, and one of the friends vanishes from view. The film ends without explanation, leaving only an unfinished echo and the puzzle on the table. There's no gore or dialogue because the entire story is told through sound design, timing, and expression. Production records show that the brothers built the puzzle prop themselves using reclaimed oak panels. The shoot lasted less than 2 days, relying on practical effects rather than post-production edits. After filming, the original puzzle is reportedly warped and split, possibly due to humidity from the set lights. It was never restored, and the directors later confirmed that only fragments of it remain. To this day, the Jigsaw is studied in short film circles for how it created unease with nothing more than silence, movement, and a table that refused to stay still. Special Day. Teal Greyhaven's Special Day came out in 2018, and it opens with a mother decorating her home for her daughter's birthday. Balloons, streamers, a cake with too many candles. Everything looks so cheerful, but there's something hollow underneath. The living room feels too quiet, too still. She keeps adjusting the same decorations, almost like she's trying to fill the silence rather than celebrate anything. And when her daughter finally arrives, the tension is immediate. She begins to study her as if she's searching for something hidden. The birthday talk turns strange, fast. She asks questions a child shouldn't even know to ask, about the day she was born, about people long gone. Her tone shifts between innocence and accusation, and the mother's calm starts to slip. The short builds through pauses instead of your typical bow. Every second feels longer than it should, and the lighting turns colder as the truth begins to surface. Greyhaven's shot most of the film in a single location, relying on quiet performances and natural light to keep the tension grounded in reality. By the end of the film, it's not clear whether this is really a birthday or a ritual of guilt being repeated. The cake stays untouched, and the mother just stares, frozen between love and fear. Don't Look Away. Christopher Cox uploaded Don't Look Away to YouTube in 2017, and it instantly joined the ranks of viral internet horror, the kind built entirely on one idea that burrows under your skin. The film was made on a tiny budget, shot in broad daylight, and yet it somehow feels darker than most horror films that rely on shadows. The entity standing on the lawn has no name, no origin, and no motive. It's humanoid, but unnervingly still, and the only rule we ever learn comes from the girl's father over a shaky phone line: never look away. That line made the short a favorite among creepypasta fans, who began linking it to the urban legend of the Watcher, a myth about beings that move only when unobserved. The entirety of the short relies on the audience's endurance. The longer you stare, the more your imagination starts to betray you. And by the time the figure disappears from the yard, it's already too late. The final seconds cut without explanation, leaving viewers to argue over what really happened. Some believe the creature was a supernatural observer, others say it's a metaphor for fear itself. Either way, it's one of the few shorts that proves horror just needs you to keep watching. Never Left. Released in 2022 by David F. Sandberg, the same filmmaker behind Lights Out and Shadowed, Never Left is about a man returning to a seemingly normal apartment, with his friend missing after a night of exploring an abandoned building. What starts as a quick check-in spirals into an eerie investigation when he finds a strange message scratched into the wall. It never left. Sandberg, who's known for shooting and editing his own films with his wife Lotta Lawson, uses practical effects and minimal dialogue to make every second count. The camera never lingers where you expect it to, letting shadows fill in the story, and the sound design is equally sharp. And then the reveal hits. A dark shape moves where the man just was, silent but unmistakable. The apartment folds in on itself, like something followed him home from that abandoned place. The screen cuts to black before we ever see its full form. Interestingly, the short was filmed entirely inside Sandberg's own apartment, using a handheld camera and just 2 actors. Despite its simplicity, it racked up millions of views online within weeks, praised for how it turned an everyday home into a place of quiet terror. Cam Closer. Cam Closer first appeared online in 2013, directed by David Sandberg, the same filmmaker behind Lights Out and Shadowed. Before Hollywood picked him up for Annabelle creation, Sandberg was mastering the art of micro-horror through short, self-contained ideas like this one. The premise was deceptively simple. A woman discovers her phone camera can see things the human eye can't. Shot entirely on a handheld device, the short leans into the grainy realism of early smartphone footage. When the woman looks through the camera, shadowy figures stand still, invisible to the naked eye. And what makes it even clever is that it flips a common behavior into a survival mechanism. There's also no backstory in this one. The minimalism of the film is what sells the fear, and by the time the woman realizes the entity moves only when unseen, it's already too late. The camera drops, and the screen freezes mid-frame. Sandberg has said this short was an experiment in perspective, and within 2 minutes, Cam Closer turns something we all carry in our pockets into the only barrier between seeing and being seen. Don't Peek. Don't Peek, directed by Julian Terry in 2020, became an instant viral sensation after premiering during the pandemic, so much so that it caught the attention of Guillermo del Toro, who began developing it into a feature film. The short follows a young woman playing Animal Crossing New Horizons alone in her bedroom when she realizes something inside the game is moving on its own. At first, the movements are harmless, but the moment she uses her Nintendo Switch to look around, the real and virtual worlds start blending. The creature inside the game begins mimicking her actions in the room, crossing the digital boundary between player and console. Terry shot the entire short in one location using natural bedroom lighting, making it feel almost like a documentary. You see, everyone watching has played a game late at night, half aware of the room around them, so Terry turns that familiar comfort into claustrophobia, making the Switch's soft glow the only source of safety and danger at the same time. It's a 2-minute masterclass in digital horror and a reminder that curiosity always comes with a price. Moshari. Directed by Nuhash Humayun in 2022, Moshari is Bangladesh's first horror short to gain international recognition, even catching the attention of Jordan Peele and Riz Ahmed, who helped promote it globally. The film follows 2 sisters, Apu and Ira, surviving in a post-apocalyptic Dhaka where bloodthirsty creatures roam the night. Their only protection is a moshari, a mosquito net that becomes a fragile border between survival and death. Humayun builds his world through small lived-in details, crumbling apartments, the sound of the call to prayer echoing through an empty city, and that suffocating net fluttering in candlelight. The monsters are rarely shown, but you feel them breathing just beyond the mesh. There's a turning point when Apu steps outside the net to check the surroundings and finds the creatures drawn to the smallest movement. The encounter forces the older sister to face both the monsters and her own guilt. In that moment, the film stops being about survival and starts reflecting on sacrifice and protection in a world that's already ended. When it premiered at SXSW, critics called it Bangladesh's answer to A Quiet Place, though Humayun rejected that label. Make Me a Sandwich. Make Me a Sandwich, directed by Denman Hatch in 2019, is one of those short horrors that starts like a joke and ends like a scream. The story unfolds inside a dim, cluttered kitchen, where an elderly husband keeps barking orders at his wife, demanding sandwich after sandwich after sandwich after sandwich. At first, it feels like a slice of dark comedy, but the camera stays long enough for the horror to rot into dread. The short was shot on a micro-budget in Canada, using only 2 actors and practical effects. Hatch uses repetitive sound cues to build tension without a single music cue in the film, and as every frame grows dirtier, the crumbs pile up and the husband's appetite turns completely grotesque. By keeping the camera fixed, the audience becomes trapped in that kitchen with them, forced to watch obedience transform into horror. Later on, the sandwiches, which seemed absurdly endless, reveal their true ingredients, turning the act of service into a ritual of revenge. Hatch based the concept on online folklore about domestic violence and emotional abuse, flipping the power dynamic in one brutal moment. It ran just under 5 minutes, but won several festival awards, including Best Short at the Horrible Imaginings Film Festival. Viewers called it the most disturbing use of a kitchen ever filmed. It's short, sharp, and ugly in all the right ways. Vicious. When Lydia returns home after her sister's death, the house doesn't feel right. The front door is cracked open, the rooms are dim, and something unseen moves just beyond the light. That's the setup for Vicious, Oliver Park's 2015 short that became one of the most awarded indie horrors of the decade. Park made Vicious on a shoestring budget in the UK, shooting inside a real residential house to preserve authenticity. There's no dialogue for most of its 8-minute runtime, but the pacing and lighting do all the storytelling. The production leans heavily on spatial awareness, empty hallways, slow pans, and the faint creak of floorboards. Every detail builds the sense that something or someone is waiting just out of frame. What's remarkable is how Park manipulates the audience's familiarity with home spaces. He said in interviews that he wanted to explore the idea that grief leaves a door open. The film literalizes that. The slightly open front door becomes the first sign that Lydia's loss has invited something in. The creature, a distorted, shadowy figure, never attacks directly. It roams about, watching, almost feeding on Lydia's vulnerability. When Vicious premiered, it swept up over 70 festival awards, earning praise for being the best single-location horror short of the decade. The 10 Steps. In 2004, Irish director Brendan Muldowney crafted The 10 Steps, a horror short that's been shown in nearly every film school sound design class since. The plot follows Katie, a babysitter in a quiet suburban home, whose father calls her long distance after the power cuts out. He tells her to walk down to the basement and check the breaker. Count 10 steps. It's an ordinary errand that turns into one of horror cinema's most nerve-wracking countdowns. Just like some of the movies mentioned earlier, Muldowney relied on only sound cues to build tension on screen. The film's mix was engineered so that the static on the phone line grows almost imperceptibly louder, pulling viewers deeper into the same sense of dread. Even film students studying Foley techniques often cite the 10 Steps as a masterclass in minimalist suspense. The film is also set in a real Victorian home in Dublin, chosen because of its uneven floorboards and echoing basement acoustics. And when Katie reaches the final step, her father's voice distorts into something inhuman. The line cuts, the house goes still, and all that's left is the faint sound of the phone swinging. And that brings us to the end of this countdown. Out of all these shorts, the 10 Steps is the one to revisit if you want to feel tension built from almost nothing. But if you prefer something more modern and surreal, Vicious delivers that creeping dread that sticks with you long after it ends. If you enjoyed this video, tap that like button, share your favorite horror short in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.